to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, May 11th, 2015, getting into a brand new week here. We have lots of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick program note, this Thursday, Michelle Rosen, the Tylenol murders case, will be our on-air guest talking about some new developments in the case. This is not going to go away, and it is an important lesson that corporations and media lying to the public to protect profits is nothing new. It's been going on all along. We're just now becoming aware of it, and that's why this story is valid for today. Before I get into the news, I have to make a comment here. I was listening to the SRN news break about this grandmother who literally forced her granddaughter to run to collapse and death supposedly because of a lie regarding candy. Now, we all more or less understand that lying is supposed to be wrong, but let's keep it proportionate. And how is it we can expect our young people to understand lying is wrong when they live in a country where the corporate media lies and the kids know it? They're not dumb. They see it. Our politicians are all lying. They're surrounded in an ocean of lies, and they see with their own eyes that the people who lie tend to get the goodies. Now, I'm not saying we should teach our kids to lie, but if we want a society in which lying is considered bad, we have to start at the top. We have to go after those big liars, and we have to make the cost of their lies exceed the gain from telling the lie in the first place. And at which point, politicians in corporate media will understand that, yes, truth has a certain value that they had forgotten all about. Now then, speaking of lies, all weekend long, the corporate media has been out there screaming about ISIS is in the United States of America. It started out with 70, and according to the FBI, it's thousands of isolated lone wolf attacks can happen any day now. Could be a new 9/11, and because they're operating as lone wolves, we can't find them with the NSA spy center. Okay, then, shut it down. See, what they're doing is they've come to understand that every time one of these staged false flags happens, like Boston bombing or this cartoon thing down in Texas, people are saying, well, that shows this whole spy system isn't working. Let's stop wasting money on it. Let's get our Bill of Rights back. So they're already coming out now to try and pre-sell, oh, it's going to be a lone wolf attack, and there's no way we could have found them. Now, the Department of Homeland Security was out there screaming about, new era lone wolf terrorism, and finally concluded by saying that actually at the moment there are no specific credible threats here in America, but of course, because they're lone wolves, we can't know. Just be afraid. Be so afraid you stop thinking and cling to Big Daddy government, throw your money and your children's lives into whatever the government wants to do here. Now, also on the SRN news break, you heard this story where Seymour Hersh has come out with a news story about how it was actually the Pakistanis who had that guy in the house in Abbottabad. The White House found out about it because somebody was trying to get the $25 million reward and said, hey, he's in this house. And Obama sent in the SEAL team to grab Osama bin Laden and all the glory for himself. Now, everybody's coming down on Seymour Hersh, including Paul Craig Roberts, because Hersh is treating the story as if that really was bin Laden in that house. And we know it wasn't. The real bin Laden died in late 2001 of natural causes. His funeral was announced in all the foreign press, not here in the U.S., and actually at one point Fox News said, yes, he's dead. And then they pulled that back because a live bin Laden they can wag at us is far more useful than a rotting corpse someplace. And we reposted to whatreallyhappened.com our gallery of fake dead bin Laden photos, because after that, the raid in Abbottabad, remember the guy who was in the house got killed, and then they threw his body in the ocean before even announcing it, and flooded the net with these faked photos attempting to prove that the U.S. had gotten Osama bin Laden, and they were very badly done. It was a rush job. Apparently they got the guy, realized it wasn't bin Laden, and said, oh, how do we recover from this? This is a real embarrassing mistake. Well, just shoot him, dump him in the ocean. We'll say that's who it was. Because we all know the real bin Laden died back in 2001. So Hersh is out there confirming the information we had in our Dead Bin Laden's page, that it was Pakistan who attacked that house in Abbottabad. And the U.S. swooped in to try and claim the credit. Are we not wonderful? We got the villain of the century. Except they didn't really get him here. Paul Craig Roberts, again, is out there, and even he is saying that wasn't the real bin Laden there. And what everybody who wants to cling to the official story needs to understand, we now know, even Seymour Hersh is saying the Obama administration lied about who actually did what in Abbottabad. And if they lied about that, how do you know they didn't lie about everything else, including the fact that that wasn't really bin Laden? Just something to think about. Now, Yemen's people are accepting a Saudi offer for a 5-day humanitarian pause, where both sides will stop shooting and food and water will get in there, because this is turning into a huge political embarrassment for Saudi Arabia, which has been turning away Iranian humanitarian aid ships and planes coming from other countries as well. And it makes Saudi Arabia look bad and makes the U.S. look bad, because everybody knows the U.S. is using Saudi Arabia as a proxy to reimpose U.S. puppet rule on the people of Yemen, who don't want it any more than the citizens of any other country don't want puppet rule. Meanwhile, though, despite the talk about a 5-day pause, Saudi Arabia's army has arrived on the border with Yemen in preparation for a land invasion. So when this 5-day ceasefire is up, the war is going to be well and truly on. Further upping the tension is the fact that a Moroccan F-16 went missing just before the ceasefire started. The Yemenites are saying they shot it down, and in the absence of any contradictory information, that may be what happened. Of course, we also know the F-16 has a very bad track record of rekitting itself because of problems with the electrical wiring harness. So let's see. A group of humanitarian aid workers are sailing for Yemen on an Iranian rescue ship. It will be a huge embarrassment if that gets turned back, but it may. Now, over in Syria, we're seeing a report out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain how Al-Qaeda has launched a heavy assault on the Syrian government stronghold with a massive suicide car bomb. Okay. Maybe it's a car bomb. Might be a stealth cruise missile or a stealth drone. And the reason I say that is because I'm looking at this article over at INFOWARS that confirms U.S. government operations rooms, war planning facilities, are backing Al-Qaeda in Syria. Remember when Al-Qaeda was the bad guy? They did 9/11. Al-Qaeda was hiding in your bedroom closet. And now we're working hand in glove against Syria. They're flipping sides back and forth. That's why they needed to come up with a new manufactured boogeyman called ISIS. Because now they're going to say, well, you know, Al-Qaeda's reformed. This is the new, sweeter-smelling Al-Qaeda, and we're working with them against that gosh darn evil, nasty Assad who refuses to run Syria for the benefit of American financial interests. Meanwhile, a Turkish cargo ship apparently strayed into Libya's territorial waters and came under fire. One officer dead, several sailors injured. Everybody's a little too trigger-happy, and everybody's skirting those territorial water lines just a little too close, I think. Should be erring on the side of caution. Meanwhile, Iran's naval forces are warning American and French ships that are straying too close to Iranian territorial waters and interfering with Iran's commercial shipping operations. So the tensions are building all over the place. When we come back from this commercial break, apparently we're going for Kiev version 2.0 over in Macedonia. And we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And over in Macedonia, over the last week and a half, we've been hearing more and more reports about riots in the streets and protests, and the corporate media is feeding us all kinds of banal reasons for why it's happening. This group is unhappy with whatever. But in the Macedonian press itself, they're out there already saying that this is a campaign to overthrow the government of Nikola Gruevski, and includes Radio Free Europe, and I'm sorry, I misspoke that. Basically, these protests are being funded by organizations like U.S. Aid, which we know was right in the thick of overthrowing Kiev's government. And so Macedonia is clearly another nation targeted for covert U.S. overthrow and installation of a new U.S. puppet. Article over at liveleak.com ties in Victoria Nuland. And basically they're saying this is Kiev version 2.0. So for those of you keeping score, the European Union and NATO wants Macedonia to stop killing the proxy army the European Union and NATO sent to thwart Russian gas pipeline to Europe. And I'm sure that makes everything crystal clear about what's going on. But what's really going on here, as you're probably aware, Russia is getting ready to launch a new pipeline that will involve Greece. And it will be routing through Macedonia. So if Macedonia is brought under U.S. puppet ruler, they can thwart this pipeline. That's what's going on here. The U.S. is basically trying to conquer the entire world and lock in the current economic order before the collapse of the U.S. dollar. By the way, Russia has extended an invitation to Greece to join the BRICS banking system. And I'm sure the money junkies in Brussels and Wall Street are just tearing their hair out, or those very expensive toupees that they wear. Speaking of Kiev, Kiev is basically moving forward with the propaganda we've been hearing that all of the upset in Ukraine is somehow Russia's fault. And Kiev is now demanding Russia pay $350 billion for the destruction brought to Ukraine. Because we all know that Vladimir Putin is on his side of the border just lobbing hand grenades over. And this is basically Kiev trying to get Russia to go on giving them free gas, which Russia is not going to do. Russia's going to laugh at this demand. Russia had nothing to do with it. What's going on in Ukraine goes back to January of last year and the covert U.S. overthrow of the Ukrainian government for daring to want to stay out of the European Union and merge with Russia. And that's what led to this prolonged civil war. And the drumbeat of propaganda we have been getting all along is somehow this is Russia's fault. Trust us, it's Russia's. Russia stole Crimea. Russia's trying to steal Donbass. Russia's trying to do this and that. No, that's not what happened. Ukraine was just the latest in a long, continuing series of covert U.S. conquests of foreign nations to bring them into the U.S. economic system. Private central banking. Now, article over at Desert Peace, Israel's new coalition, talking about how this new right-wing government Netanyahu is putting together, just slightly to the right of Attila the Hun, is basically openly saying that they are going to increase the attacks and abuse on the Palestinian people. They don't care if they're innocent bystanders or children. They just want the Palestinians out. They want Palestine is what they want. They've wanted it all along. And if they get Palestine, then they'll want Iraq, and then they'll want half of Egypt. Because the grand plan is Eretz Israel, the Israel as described in the Bible that reaches from the Nile to the Euphrates. By the way, there was a very interesting TV series. It just wrapped up. They had this season finale called Dig. It's sort of a archaeological, religious theme, and it was filmed in Israel, which is another reason it was fun to watch, to see a lot of what Israel is like there. And basically a bunch of very religious individuals trying to bring about the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the construction of the third, actually would be the fourth, temple. Now let's talk about the economy a little bit here. When Obama talks about his massive fight with Wall Street, what does he mean? This is a question being asked by Zero Hedge. And it's talking about these partnerships that are going on up there, and how the TPP is supposed to lock in the current economic status quo around the Pacific nations to stop the ascendancy of China in global trade before the U.S. dollar really starts to collapse. That's what these two treaties are, the Trans-Pacific Pact and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Pact. These are designed to lock in the current economic system by treaty before the dollar collapses and these other countries realize what a raw deal they're getting. The treaties are in trouble. They've thrown a lot of things in there these other countries don't like bans on GMO labeling. And the other part is that the sovereignty of the signing nations to these treaties is superseded by these corporate transnational committees, which can go into a country and say, well, we don't think your law should be valid. So even if we had a GMO labeling law in the United States, under the TPP, the corporations could say, no, we don't agree with that. You have to suspend that law. It's a transfer of sovereignty from the nation state to the corporate state, and a lot of nation states are not happy about that idea whatsoever. Article out of SHTFplan.com, the larger than ever big banks are poised to fail again. The damage will not be contained. Basically what they're saying is the banks and financial institutions that were behind the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud and subsequent crash didn't have to pay the costs of their wrongdoing. The costs were transferred onto the American taxpayer through TARP and various other bailouts and quantitative easing. So Wall Street did not learn a lesson other than, hey, next time we try, we'll get it right. And these banks that are allowed now to engage in market trading have bubbled up even bigger than they were before. Now, last time the whole system collapsed, the American people had enough cash floating around to stop the damage. We don't anymore. That's the problem. The facilities they had available to contain the damage from the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud are not available any longer. All they have are the printing presses, and that much printing is going to crash the U.S. dollar, and that's the reason they're rushing to get these treaties signed as quickly as they can. Now, Barclays and the Royal Bank of Scotland have, once again, been hit with penalties worth nearly £3 billion for rigging the foreign exchange markets. Do you understand that the banks are the biggest bank robbers of all? And why private central banking is the common enemy of all mankind? Money is far too important to be left to private bankers to manage and manipulate. It has to be handled as a public utility. It was originally in the United States, and it worked. But the greed of the money junkies and the corruptibility of our politicians sold us back into the same economic slavery we fought a revolution to be free of. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economy, and we're hearing all over the globe about austerity, austerity. It sounds so wonderful, but a little point of clarity. When you yourself choose to live a simpler, less expensive lifestyle, that is austerity. When the government comes in and demands you live a simpler, less expensive lifestyle so they can siphon more wealth from you, that's not austerity, that's dictatorship. People are very upset over austerity because they've already seen in Greece austerity doesn't work. All austerity does is accelerate the looting of the people for the money junkies. Now, there's an article over at automaticearth.com. Will austerity be the straw that breaks the EU and the UK? Because there are already protests all across Europe and Great Britain against austerity. Because these are people who are paying taxes and seeing nothing come back for it. There is no value for money. The infrastructure is deteriorated. There are no social services. All these people see is the money flowing out of their pocket and going off to some other country to put in the pockets of people who already have more money than they know what to do with. And austerity was supposed to be a big issue in the recent British elections, which is why everybody's viewing David Cameron's victory as a surprise, along with George Galloway's defeat. Surprise, unexpected. The polls never predicted it. Boy, those pollsters must have been wrong again. No. Even after the election results were announced, they were still finding boxes of uncounted ballots in the Labour Party districts. They're not even trying to hide the vote fraud any longer here. Now, the U.S. Department of the Treasury, on their webpage, has a number indicating the current U.S. government debt. That number has been frozen for the last 50 days. And it's frozen just below the current congressional mandated debt limit. Do we think the government just stopped borrowing 50 days ago? No. like the unemployment numbers, it's just a comfortable illusion they are feeding to you. And we're already hearing in Congress talk about raising the debt ceiling. And they're trying to get everybody divided on the question, should we raise the debt ceiling? Should we cut more spending? Should we do this? And they're putting that out there because there's a question they don't want you, the American people, to be asking. And that is, why, if the Congress authorizes the U.S. government to create and issue a debt-free currency to fund itself, a public currency operated as a public utility, why does our government instead borrow that money at interest from a privately owned central bank, thereby plunging the American people into hopelessly unpayable debt for the future? They don't really have an answer for that, except that 100 years ago, a corrupt president and a corrupted Congress, in exchange for their 30 pieces of silver each, sold the American people back into the slavery of the same exact predatory banking system we fought a revolution to break free of. That's it. That's what's going on. You have been sold into the slavery of the bankers by your own government, and they don't want to talk about it. So the question is, should we raise the debt ceiling or not? The issue is there shouldn't be a debt ceiling to begin with. That debt ceiling, that huge debt, is your slave chains fully on display to the world. Now, a lot of people are starting to look at this Jade Helm 15 exercise. Is it simply a training exercise? And if so, it is clearly training the U.S. military to control the streets of America in the event Americans all of a sudden wake up and realize how badly they've been had by their own government. A lot of other people are saying this is it. This is going to be the actual takeover and declaration of dictatorship. Still unclear who may be right or who may be wrong. But a lot of this could be tied in with that debt ceiling issue, because Americans don't want to be driven more into debt. More and more Americans understand that debt is an artificially created device to control us, to control the nation, for the benefit of those private central bankers. And by the way, apparently the net neutrality regulations are going into effect just a few days before Jade Helm 15. So a lot of things are coming together at the same time. The fact of the matter is, looking at the government's finances for the last 100 years, it is clear they cannot balance their books. They never have, they never will. They're never going to get out of debt. They haven't yet. This government has not paid off its national debt since President Andrew Jackson. And he shut down his private central bank in order to be able to do it. Now, over in Detroit, the city is starting today to post shut-off warnings on people whose water bills are unpaid. They're sending the notification, either pay up or get on a payment plan or do something or we will shut the water. Do you realize how this makes us look to the rest of the world? We're supposed to be the greatest nation on earth, and we know we're not. We're descending into a third world fascist economic dictatorship. The water shutoffs are part of it. The privatization of water is what led to this. And we have a U.S. government that is siphoning more money out of our pockets than at any other time in history, and they'll send bucket loads of it to Israel, to Saudi Arabia, weapons for whoever is fighting our proxy wars for us, and they can't afford to turn on the water for U.S. citizens. Kind of tells you where you are in Washington, D.C.'s hierarchy of priorities. Now, there's a very enlightening article over at nationofchange.org, and it gets to the heart of the matter. Why the rich don't care about jobs for the rest of us. And you could extend that to include infrastructure, quality of life. And it talks about studies of the psychology of people who become wealthy, especially those born into wealth, where they tend to be narcissistic, and they tend to believe that they are supposed to have more than anybody else. And they'll think whatever talent or ability or looks or whatever they're supposed to have earns them the right to have more than anybody else and to just go on and take it. And we know that money addiction is a very real illness. It doesn't matter how much they've got. They got to have more. Bernie Madoff with the loot is a good example of that. He had more money than any human could ever spend in a single lifetime, and he still had to go out and set up his little Ponzi scheme. Person who's a millionaire, they want to be a 2 millionaire. 2 millionaire wants to be a 4 millionaire. Millionaire wants to be a billionaire, then a trillionaire. It's all about keeping score. It's about vanity and ego. And like any other addiction, it is destroying society around it. But because the money junkies have the mansions and the cars and the clothes and everything, we don't realize that this addiction is just as destructive of our whole society as meth addiction, heroin addiction, cocaine addiction, pill addiction, alcohol, whatever. It is an illness. And these people are very delusional. They're absolutely convinced they are supposed to have the lion's share of life's blessings, and people who are being driven into poverty and squalor and desperation by the economic system, well, they deserve to be there. They didn't, what was it, some politician last week said, our poor in the United States are the envy of the poor everywhere else. I mean, that is really psychotic speaking. All righty, let's see. I'm going to start here with Peter in California. Peter, I'm going to have to take you through the commercial break, but what's on your mind?
Mike, I just wanted to say, you were talking about declaring dictatorship and all that, the possibility. And you can get this on the whitehouse.gov website, on the White House website, but there's an executive order called the National Defense Resources Preparedness Act that grants the president where he can declare a state of national emergency. And
okay, hold that thought. We're going to take 4 minutes for commercials. This is an important story that you've got. Don't go away. We'll come right back to you after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones here to Peter in California, who is talking about some of the already on the books executive orders loosely grouped under what are called the FEMA Acts. And, Peter, go ahead.
Well, everybody here is already aware, I'm sure, that the president has the right under NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, to imprison anybody he chooses to indefinitely without even charging him with a crime forever if he wants, at his whim. We also know that he's asserted the right and has actually carried it out to murder American citizens with absolutely no oversight whatsoever, claims that's his right. But also there's this National Defense Resources Preparedness Act that's on the whitehouse.gov, or at least it was a couple months back, and you can probably still look it up. But on the declaration of a national emergency, Mike, and by the way, the criteria for which is not defined. It could be at the president's complete whim that he declares a national emergency. He can take over, in effect, everything from all the media and newspapers to all the transportation, the airlines, the trains, the trucking, all the hospitals and health care, all the food distribution, everything. He's not required to consult with Congress except after 1 year. He's required to go in front of Congress and explain what he's been doing for the last year under this situation. Now, a buddy of mine and I were talking this morning and saying, it's kind of a dictatorship. And I said, it is right now. All he has to do is declare it. We were talking about the story that I read on what really happened, about the Seymour Hersh thing, about all that stuff we were told about Osama bin Laden being a lie, which you and I knew from the very beginning, but now everybody's starting to come around to it. And I said, well, all you really need to do is wait for the Congress to go on its annual hiatus, and then they never get back together again. Or let's say the president committed some horrible crime like the murder of SEAL Team 6 to cover up another lie, right? And before that lie is exposed and he's impeached or whatever, he declares at his whim, of course, he declares a national emergency and takes over the whole country.
Okay, now, Peter, and I need to insert here for a little bit. These documents you're talking about represent a consolidation of a whole series of presidential executive orders going all the way back to Richard Nixon, and in point of fact, they do list the circumstances under which the president can declare a national emergency, which does include mass civil uprising or an economic crash. So technically, Obama can't just say today is a national emergency, but certainly the sorts of things that he needs to declare a national emergency are easy enough for the government to manufacture. And we're already seeing them trying to kick up race riots all across the country. And it would take very little of a push to absolutely collapse our fragile economic system, either which would allow Obama to say, okay, we're in a state of national emergency, martial law, suspend the Constitution, and you're all going to do what I say from now on.
Well, Mike, what do you think about the theory that, they commit crimes all the time, but one is about to come out and the president declares that's when he finally goes overboard, and he says, all right, this is a national emergency.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, the reason I think it would be very dangerous for him to do, okay, back in pre-World War II Germany, when the Nazis were rising to power and they got the enabling acts, everything that they did was accepted as necessary by the German people who believed what their government was telling them. Today is a very different situation. Most Americans are aware the U.S. government has gone off that constitutional reservation, and a declaration of national emergency and martial law would not be quietly accepted by the vast majority of the American people, who would find ways to resist, not openly militarily, but they'd find ways to gum up the system. This idea of the president saying, I hereby declare a national emergency and I'm now the capo di tutti capi, only works if the majority of the public believes it's necessary and right to do, and they can't get that.
I hope you're right, Michael. I suspect that you might not be in this one, but I hope you're right.
Well, time will solve that mystery.
All right, well, hey, listen, thanks very much, Michael. That's it for me.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now then, as we mentioned before, over in Great Britain, they had elections. The outcome was a tremendous surprise. David Cameron's Conservatives secured a huge lead, surprising everybody. George Galloway lost his seat in Parliament, again surprising everybody. We know there were allegations of irregularities all across Great Britain. Postal votes didn't arrive. Huge numbers of postal votes showed up at the last second. Entire boxes of ballots weren't even counted. And one of the Tories' agenda going into the new government is a push to scrap Britain's Human Rights Acts, so that the Lords can go back to flogging the masses for not doing what they are told to do. And there's an article over in Russia Today saying that the scrapping of the Human Rights Act could probably spark a constitutional crisis in Great Britain. And certainly it means the erosion of civil liberties. Basically, what they want to do is take the intent of the Magna Carta and throw it in the shredder and go back to 11th century systems of government. The Lords own the land owns the common people, and you just do what we tell you. That's what they're heading to with this. Now, there's an article in Investment Watch blog, Post-Election Resistance, something for the voting supporters to chew on, because there are already protests all across Great Britain protesting that this election seems to have been crooked. And it's not just the people in the street. Over at the Daily Mail, they ran an article saying that it's time to scrap this postal vote system. It is wide open to fraud. Every election that uses postal votes is fixed. Vote rigging is a probability across Britain. Not just a possibility, it is a probability. They're saying that more often than not the elections are cheated, which we certainly saw up at the Scottish referendum. And that, more than anything else, is the explanation behind Cameron's surprise victory and George Galloway's equally surprising loss. And as a matter of fact, George Galloway is launching a legal action to force a recount of the vote for his seat, because he doesn't think he lost fair and square. And he claims to have found evidence of malpractice in the postal voting system. There's no accountability, there's no tracking, there's no audit. It is wide open to fraud, just like absentee ballots here in the United States. It's intentionally built into the system to allow the powerful to corrupt the elections to suit their own agenda. By the way, David Cameron is already out there saying there absolutely will never, ever, ever, ever be another independence referendum for Scotland. The Scots already decided once. That's good enough for history. No, the Scots didn't decide. The British government stole that election. And Cameron's attitude is, we stole it fair and square. You're just going to have to live with that. Now, turning to American politics, Jeb Bush is out there saying that if he had been president, back when his brother, George, was, he would have invaded Iraq. He would have gone along with the lies about weapons of mass destruction. He thinks that was just a great thing. Let's lie about Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, invade the place, wreck it for the people who live there, kill Saddam Hussein, because, gosh darn it, Iraq should not be allowed to sell their oil for the euro, which was the real cause of that war. Meanwhile, Republican presidential hopeful Scott Walker has officially launched his career. He's on his way to Israel to get his picture taken at the Wailing Wall. It is embarrassing and humiliating for all American people to see their candidates' first action upon announcing their candidacy to go off to Israel, to daven to the rulers of the world. And they're basically flashing a neon sign. Yeah, we're selling America to Israel to get elected. Deal with it. That's what they're saying. Meanwhile, Marco Rubio is out there campaigning, saying not a single documented case of abuse of NSA program is in existence. How do you know, Mark? It's all classified. The NSA isn't sharing any of it with anybody. You can't make that statement, Marco. You can't prove a negative. All this proves is that the NSA's got the goods on you. You did something, NSA found it, and that's why you're out there saying, oh, the NSA is wonderful, we've got to go on letting them pry into our lives. All right, there's music. We're going to take a break for the top of the hour news. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We've got a caller waiting on the line. Before I take the call, I want to wrap up on our rundown, if you will, of the presidential candidates, because apparently Hillary Clinton is now out there equating gun owners with terrorists. She supports a total ban on all guns in the hands of civilians. She thinks gun-free zones work, even though many of the mass shootings wagged at us by the gun grabbers took place in these gun-free zones. Because when it says gun-free zone, it's telling the shooter nobody there is prepared to shoot back at you. And apparently she came out, this was actually an interview from last year, but it's seeing the light of day again as she runs for office. She's out there where she's claiming that those who don't agree with her views on gun control are prone to violence. Okay? Now, the most polite and respectful people I have ever met were gun store customers. Okay? You will never see a Walmart-style holiday crush riot at a gun store, will you? It's just not going to happen. It's those Walmart customers who aren't carrying guns. They're prone to violence. They're killing each other, trying to get the latest toy during Black Friday or whatever they call it here. All right, let's grab some phone calls here. Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thank you for the forum, and I appreciate you taking my call. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm waiting for you.
Yeah, I was going to ask something about George Galloway and how he's like the modern day Robert the Bruce, exactly. But when you start mentioning this gun control with Hillary Clinton, that article, yeah, you know, this is from an article by David Kopel, and just briefly it says, This article reviews the British gun control program that participated in the American Revolution. And I know you know this.
Yes.
The 1774 import ban on firearms and gunpowder, the 1774 to 75 confiscation of firearms and gunpowder, and the use of violence to effectuate the confiscation. It was these events that changed the situation of political tension into a shooting war. Even those who don't learn from history, they're doomed to repeat it. What is these? Do they think this is not going to happen? Or
yeah, they always think they can do it right. I mean, history has shown no gun ban has ever disarmed the criminals. No gun ban has done more than slightly delay the resulting pushback. Hitler had gun confiscation across Germany. The Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto were still able to acquire enough firearms to stage their uprising. It just doesn't work. But it sounds really good. And, our current crop of politicians, the reason they keep making the same mistakes over and over again is they are so in love with themselves, they'll say, I can get it to work. Yes, all these other rulers fail to accomplish this. I can make it work because I am better than they ever were.
But you know what, Mike, you're right, exactly. But and I'm just like you, I'm a pacifist. I don't believe in violence, and I can't even swat a fly anymore. But, when you really look at Robert the Bruce, the revolution, it seems like those psychopaths in charge, like you've aptly described them, they're psychopaths. They don't know how to do it except take it to the wall. And so there has to be, if there's not violence, well, you just really slaughter like sheep.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Further on in the show, we're going to be talking about the police violence issue, and somebody wrote an article basically saying the new American Civil War has already started. It is the government and the police against the American people, and the government and the police are drawing first blood.
Wow. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Thanks, Michael. I'll listen to the rest of the show. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, and we're going to switch over to Jeff in Minnesota. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, I like your bumper music, so I'm asking you to start a web page listing the names and pointing to, like, YouTubes or MP3s.
It's already there. It's already there. Go to WRHradio.com. Halfway down the page, there's a link that says the music from the What Really Happened radio show. It'll take you to a page with a player and links to their websites and everything.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
All right. We'll let you go. Now then. Those of you who have been listeners to the show or readers of my website for a while know about the Lavon affair. This happened back in the 1950s, where American and British assets in Egypt were being bombed, and evidence was found to lay the blame at the feet of Egyptian Muslims. Then one of the bombs detonated prematurely. The bomber was caught, turned out to be an Israeli agent. Israel's immediate reaction is, oh, it's an anti-Semitic plot. We would never do anything like that. The anti-Semites set it up. And then after screaming and wringing their hands and everything, Israel was forced to admit that, yeah, it was ours. We were doing the bombings here. Our face is red. We promise we won't ever do it again. That was back in the 1950s. Only just now is the IDF declassifying their documents for the Lavon affair, which confirms what everybody knows to be true. Israeli agents were committing acts of terror to frame on the Muslims. And, of course, Israel's attitude is, well, you caught us that once, we would never do it again. Then, of course, there was the false flag attack on the USS Liberty that was blamed on Egypt. Israel appears to have had a hand in the assassination of U.S. President John F. Kennedy, who was adamant that Israel not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons, a policy reversed by Kennedy's successor, Lyndon Johnson. And, of course, we know that Israel was involved in the tricking Reagan into bombing Libya. And let us not forget those dancing Israelis who were arrested after they were seen cheering and clapping as the World Trade Towers came down. NPR identified at least 3 of them as known Mossad agents. They were very quietly shipped back to Israel. And in Carl Cameron's 4-part series on the Israeli spy ring, the largest spy ring ever uncovered in the United States, spying on America for Israel, and a U.S. government official admitted there was evidence linking those arrested Mossad agents to 9/11, but that evidence was classified by the United States government. Now, up in Ottawa, they are considering laws that will make it a hate crime to boycott Israel. So much for freedom of speech up there in Canada. Basically, if you join or endorse a boycott against Israel, you are guilty of a hate crime, and they will do terrible things to you. So welcome to our world, Canada. You now live under a puppet government that rules you on behalf of Tel Aviv. And they don't care if you know it or not. If you complain about it, that's a hate crime. If you don't want to be ruled on behalf of Israel, oh, Mo, you must be an anti-Semitic Jew-hater who wants Hitler to come back and gas Israeli babies. Meanwhile, story out of Huffington Post, Obama administration faces mounting pressure to answer for torture. Now, in fairness, the torture was not started by Obama. He continued it. The blood is on his hands for that, but it was started by the preceding administration of George Bush. Both presidents are guilty. Both parties are complicit. And torture is wrong. It's an international crime. All the more so because they were torturing innocent Iraqis to death to find nuclear weapons that turned out not to exist. Now, as you know, the U.S. Department of Justice is saying they are not going to prosecute any American officials for torture. They originally said that they read the Senate's report on torture and found no new information. Now they've admitted to Huffington Post nobody at the Department of Justice has even read the report. They don't care. We have decided these people are above the law. Why should we bother ourselves with paperwork over that? We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And it seems like a lot of the scandals that have plagued the Obama administration are starting to bubble up to the surface of that giant cesspool called Washington, D.C. one more time. And looking back at Benghazi and how obviously Barack Obama and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton are trying to distance themselves, you know, what does it matter? And it turns out that under U.S. law, only President Obama could give the authorization for what are called cross-border operations going into other countries with drones, with covert action teams, whatever. So Obama's trying to say this just all happened and I wasn't even watching doesn't hold any water. Same thing with Hillary Clinton. Now, what happened at Benghazi appears to have been they wanted to shut that operation down. The consulate in Benghazi was the hub of gun running from Libya into the al-Qaeda hired mercenaries in Syria. The U.S. was trying to conceal the fact back then that they were aiding al-Qaeda against Bashar al-Assad. Today, they openly admit it. Back then, it wasn't. You weren't supposed to know about it. And so they had this gun-running operation, and it was being shut down, and they wanted to basically get rid of the evidence, and they figured, well, hey, we need an event that is going to destroy the consulate and the trail, and at the same time, let's have an event that makes Obama look good for re-election. We'll have a bunch of our actors pretending to be terrorists kidnap the ambassador, and then Obama will rectify the situation, proving that he is not another Jimmy Carter. Because remember, when this all went down, Obama was trailing Romney in the polls for the presidential race. And the best laid plans of mice and men gang after glee, and the covert action team playing al-Qaeda went in, attacked the consulate, and if you look at the consulate location in Google Earth, there are residential areas nearby that would have heard the gunfire. They were hearing the gunfire over at the CIA annex. So it looks to me like what happened is the Libyan people said, yes, they're kicking out the Americans. And the Libyans don't like their U.S. puppet rulers any more than Yemen or Iran or Iraq. And they joined on in. And this carefully choreographed, stage-managed theater piece turned into a wild mob in which the ambassador and 3 others were killed. And so the White House put out that story about, oh, this was riots caused by this film that was insulting to Mohammed, and they don't appreciate the First Amendment. And there was this really crappy trailer that was put out there on YouTube. The people who were in it said that their lines were overdubbed to put other words in their mouth. And as it turned out, the actual movie never existed. It was just a hastily thrown together trailer out of film shot for another movie. And they put it out there and said, this is what happened. They're just reacting badly to this movie. And when you're dealing with propaganda, shooting from the hip doesn't really work. You will very often shoot yourself in the foot. This was certainly the case here. Meanwhile, we are now 2 years on the IRS scandal, in which the IRS targeted Obama's enemies for harassment, for delaying their nonprofit status, for various other issues. Lois Lerner was trying to duck the blame by saying the dog had eaten her emails. Supposedly, some of the emails have now been found, but I'm sure 2 years later they've all been carefully gone through to remove anything that was incriminating. It's kind of the same way that Hillary handled her email server scandal. Here, this is what I will show you all on paper, so you can't use a computer to search it, and I formatted the drives of my server. That's the end of the story. So they're just dragging on the IRS scandal, going absolutely nowhere with it, because that's how they handle the scandals. Oh, yes, we, the government, will have an investigation. Nobody else is allowed to investigate. We will investigate. We will take care of it. And then they just wait for the relevant people to pass away. Now, as you heard on the SRN News Break, George Zimmerman has been shot at down in Lake Mary. Apparently somebody put a bullet through the window of the vehicle he was driving. He was cut by flying glass, but as of the last word, the bullet did not actually hit him. And this comes under the heading of somebody somewhere is desperate to kick up massive race riots in this country, which would be seized on as justification by Obama to declare a state of national emergency, martial law, blah, 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 blah. And this idea that the 6 officers arrested in Baltimore might have the charges dropped. That is a hammer waiting to fall to start the riots back up again. Meanwhile, a couple of things you need to keep in mind. Over the last few years, thousands of people have been brought to the Baltimore City Jail with injuries acquired during their arrest and transport that were so severe they couldn't be allowed into the jail. They had to be sent to the hospital. This is a common, ongoing problem. The city of Baltimore has paid out something like $5 million for people who are given these rough rides. That's the police term of craft for that. A rough ride is where they handcuff your hands behind you, put you in leg irons, throw you in the back of the van, don't put you in a seat with a seat belt, and the driver just careens down the roadway swinging back and forth so that you rattle around the inside of the police van. And it's happened before. They've had to pay damages for the lawsuits. And that's what happened to Freddie Gray. And the police defenders are still out there saying, well, it wouldn't have, he had a car accident, People have car accidents. People have medical issues. You're supposed to take that into account when you're arresting and transporting them. If the police had transported Freddie Gray the way policy says they should, put him in a seat with a seat belt and drive obeying the traffic laws, nothing bad would have happened. What the Baltimore police are out there saying is, we treat everybody this way, and he only died because he had a medical weakness. That's not suitable. They're still out there trying to push this racism issue in the Baltimore police, but folks, 43% of the Baltimore police are black. Doesn't sound like race is a factor. Police brutality is. Let's see, Delaware. Police officer arrested after dashcam footage showed this officer kicking the suspect in the face. Guy was on the ground, the officer just kicks him in the face. At least they're arresting the officer. That would be a good one here. Now, let's see, over in South Carolina, a black homeowner called 911 because of a home invasion. The police showed up, saw the black homeowner holding a gun with which he had driven off the home invaders and shoot the homeowner. When we come back, some more stinky badges. I've got one here. This makes me nauseous to read. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at the Fox News feed during the commercial break. They're back to pushing terror, 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 terror. ISIS is here. ISIS is going to get you. ISIS is under your bed. ISIS is hiding in your bedroom closet. ISIS is stealing socks out of your dresser drawers. ISIS is passing gas in elevators. They're really pounding this. And, of course, we're coming up on the Memorial Day holiday. But at this point, it is very clear that they're trying to revive that whole terror meme so that you will disconnect your brain and go back to being an obedient drone who will do what you're told to do by the government. Throw your money at the politicians and the money junkies and your babies into foreign countries who don't really want them there. Now, getting on back to the stinky badges, this really sickens me. And it's not violent and bloody, but if you just think about the mindset here. Okay, over in Lee, Massachusetts, their chief of police, Joseph Buffus, is going to trial next week for stealing $60,000 from the Christmas Toy Fund for Needy Children. And apparently he did this over a number of years. There are indications that he did additional years for additional money, but this is what they're taking him to trial with. I mean, this is a chief of police who thinks it's cool after his department sets up this charity for a toy fund for needy children, and he just reaches into it for himself. $60,000. Just amazing. I'd rather just buy toys and hand them to the kids myself, just like we do with our food programs. We buy the food, we hand it out. There's nobody taking a piece of the action along the way. Now, I mentioned this story earlier in the program on a phone call. 5 reasons police have probably started the next civil war. And yes, admittedly, it's over on the Cracked website, which is mostly humor and that kind of thing, satire and whatnot. But somebody writing for Cracked is very politically aware, and every once in a while they'll put out one of these 5 reasons or 5 or whatever that is less funny and more insightful. And basically the gist of this article is the United States is already in a new civil war declared by the government against the American people and currently being waged by the police. And it fits the pattern because over the last decade we have seen the police mutate away from punishing the guilty into simply punishing people at random or pillaging them or looting them. And that's not law enforcement, that's not justice, that's predation, that's conquest. By the way, not too long ago I was talking about how there was a big stink here in Hawaii because our traffic is terrible. We've got the worst traffic in the country according to the U.S. Department of Transportation. And it's been made worse recently by the construction on the light rail system, which gridlocks the H1 all the way from Waikiki out to Ewa. And it really is, it's gridlock. So traffic was gridlocked in Waikiki about 2 weeks ago. The cars were not moving, and the police were just walking down the cars, writing out tickets for using your cell phone while driving. It's a $290 ticket. They wrote about $18,000 worth of tickets in the space of 5 minutes. Now, for most of these people who actually have jobs, they can't afford to go to court to argue before the judge, I was not driving. The traffic was at a standstill. So they'll just pay the fine. And today I got word that a family member of one of the good friends of our website and radio show got hit with that same thing. They're here in Hawaii. The first day they were here, their rental car got towed, $700 to get that back. And the next day nailed for using a cell phone while driving, even though this person also was sitting in unmoving gridlock traffic. This is not law enforcement. This is not public safety. This is pillaging the population to raise revenue for the oppressive state. That's all it is. And I'm starting to wonder if the cell phone companies, the cell phone providers, are realizing that if people stop using their cell phones, even when they're sitting still in gridlock traffic, it's a loss of revenue to them. So ultimately, we've got government looting corporations and corporations looting government. That, too, suggests we're in a state of abstracted civil war. Now, getting on back to that Texas attack, we are now learning that the FBI sent out a bulletin to be on the lookout for these shooters 2 days before they showed up at the cartoon competition. Now, taken at face value, this reminds us all that this NSA spying, FBI infiltration, CIA torture, TSA crotch grabbing, police brutality are batting zero at their claimed purpose of stopping terror attacks. That is, if you take any of these stories at face value, and I certainly do not. Very odd situation, though, about that story down in Garland, Texas. One report said these 2 shooters were taken down by 4 members of a SWAT team. Then the story changed to say a security guard shot them and brought them down, except that security guard's name has never been released. This guy's supposed to be the hero of the day, and they're keeping him hidden. And I can understand why. If there was a SWAT team on site, given that this whole incident was over within about 15 seconds, how did SWAT know they needed to be there? Especially with all these other agencies saying, we had no idea it was going to happen. The whole thing's a fraud. They wanted a Charlie Hebdo-style attack in the U.S. to push the anti-terror, anti-civil rights, anti-Bill of Rights agenda. And they didn't get it. But what it means is Pamela Geller and her people set up those cartoonists to be killed for political gain. Now, questions are still swirling over who funds Pamela Geller and her very offensive, hate-mongering, anti-Islam advertisements and cartoon contests. And we know that she's rich in her own right. She got $4 million in her divorce settlement, and then another $5 million when her ex-husband died rather quickly thereafter. So she's set for life, and she's out there justifying her wealth and ascendancy by, I have a mission to get all the Muslims and so forth and so on. But a lot of the donors to her project are masked behind cutouts. Not all of them, though, because apparently, back in 2010, a foundation called the Allen and Hope Winters Foundation gave $5,000 to the American Freedom Defense Initiative in 2010. And let's see, other donors include the Hudson Institute, David Yashalmi's Society of Americans for National Existence, and basically, we're looking at these foundations are paying for these anti-Muslim hate-mongering ads, which should tell you, just because somebody says they've got a foundation doesn't mean they're doing good work. Right, Bill and Melinda Gates? Now, getting back to the British election story just now coming in, David Cameron has the first Tory-only cabinet in 18 years. He's announced the first thing they're going to do is weld Great Britain to the European Union. Huzzah, huzzah. It will be wonderful. All right, we got, let's see. Got 30 seconds here. Once again, Alaska and Hawaii accused the U.S. of illegal annexation, occupation of its territories. The U.S. government has actually admitted, yeah, we stole Hawaii. We feel really bad about it. We're not going to give it back, but we feel really bad about it. But the reality is, Hawaii is not legally a state of the United States. It got stolen. And the U.S. admits stealing it, and they're going to say, well, we feel bad about it, but we're not giving it back. So there, what are you going to do? Rebel? We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go ahead and go right to the phones here. Wes in Idaho. Aloha, Wes. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Have you seen the documentary Hellstorm by Kyle Hunt, based on a book by Tom Goodrich? Hitler gave England Dunkirk, allowing 200,000 British soldiers to go home in safety, even though he could have put everyone in prison or killed every one of them, and he got Dresden in return, and that is what this movie is about, is Dresden and what the USSR did when they came into Europe, into Germany after World War II. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about there?
Yeah, we linked Hellstorm to whatreallyhappened.com. I didn't watch it all the way through, but I watched part of it. And the reality is that we know when nations go to wars, they do bad things in both directions. And then after the war is over, the victor gets to write the history books to say, we were all good and they were all bad. And, you know, we talk about the people who were in Germany's slave labor camps before and during the war, and then our schools don't mention the concentration camps after the war where the captured German soldiers were basically starved to death, because you're not supposed to see your government in that negative light. And, you know, at this point, I think most Americans are waking up and realizing that the government of the United States of America is no better and no worse than any of the other governments that we see looking at history. And this idea that we grew up with, that we had the best government and our government was good and their government was stinky, was dangerously naive, and we shouldn't have allowed ourselves to get suckered into that. But the government is very determined in its brainwashing. In fact, I got an email from somebody saying that they had just opened up a museum of tolerance in their town, Holocaust Museum, and by golly, the first thing they did is all the schools are sending busloads of kids over there. You will walk through, you will look at this, you will believe what you're told, because, hey, if it's in a museum, it must be true. And, of course, we know that's false. There are actually museums in the United States of America supporting the biblical account of creation, where they've got displays of humans and dinosaurs side by side. Most of those have now gone out of business. But a lot of junk, shows up in museums. Museums get embarrassed. Museums are no more accurate than science, and science makes goofs. But we know that our government is desperate to propagandize the American people back to that state of trusting naivete that we had in the 1950s and 1960s, and it's not going to happen. And that Harvard University study in which they found only 2% of America's young people believe the corporate media tells us the U.S. government has lost the war for the minds of America. They've got a massive credibility problem of their own making, which is why I feel no sympathy for them whatsoever. There were a lot of bad things that happened in World War II that we don't know about because our allies and ourselves were doing them. One of the biggest lies of World War II is that the United States won it. And that's not true. The United States entry helped bring the war to an end, but the German army had been decimated over in Russia on the Eastern Front, and the U.S. came in, basically brought in a bunch of new hardware that allowed the war to be brought to a conclusion. But we didn't win it all by ourselves, and yet every movie that comes out of Hollywood about World War II, the victorious Americans against the Nazis. And it's a source of major irritation to people in Europe. Because when I worked in Europe, we talked about this, and they said, you guys act like it was all your doing, and it wasn't. And especially the Russians are very upset over the fact that the U.S. tries to claim to have been the decisive factor against Nazi Germany, when it certainly was not. So Hellstorm does show a lot of stuff. They show about the concentration camps where German POWs were deliberately starved to death. They talk about the firebombing of Dresden, which served no strategic military purpose whatsoever. It was designed as psychological shock to the German people that we were willing to destroy this cultural center that callously. Just like Japan was already trying to surrender at the end of their portion of World War II, and Truman dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to prove to the rest of the world that we had them and were psychotic enough to use them.
I think you're wrong in suggesting that Israel turned red in the face, blushed over Levantafare. I don't think these people are capable of embarrassment. You have to have that part of the gene that you can blush, and these people are such psychopaths. Watching that movie Hellstorm, it's hard to believe the unhuman crimes. And once again, I'm trying to get it through to you, to the audience out there. Hitler gave England Dunkirk, which allowed 200,000.
Okay, you already mentioned that. And if you go look at my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, there's documentation in there that Hitler did not want these wars. He was maneuvered into it. We've got quotes by Churchill from the 1930s saying we're going to force this war on Germany if they want it or not, because we have to destroy their manufacturing base and their state-issued currency because we can't compete against that. Anyway, listen, Wes, I got to let you go. We got another caller on the line. We're going to switch over here to Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Mike. Just because it's in a museum or Holocaust museum, whatever, it doesn't make it true. Look at Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Yes.
Hey, I'm glad that guy brought up Hellstorm, because that was a very shocking thing, not only about the United States, but that Winston Churchill and Stalin and, that whole bunch. And, I thank goodness for you, Mike, for being out there, and I thank you so much.
Thank you for those kind words.
Because I've been listening to you for, 2-3 years, and what I have not learned from you and some other people. But, there's definitely the well poisoners out there, and you got to be leery of them.
Yes. No, the United States government, the Israeli government, I mean, they're mounting these massive operations to try and infiltrate, disrupt, and decoy, if you will, the independent media. They're pouring vast resources into it because their previous propaganda ministry, the corporate media, has fallen flat on its face. The ratings are just plummeting, and so they're trying to play their little propaganda games with the independent media. The difference is that whereas the corporate media was under the control of a handful of people who could be bribed or co-opted, the independent media is diffuse across the net. There are tens of thousands of people with independent media outlets, and trying to somehow co-opt or corral all of them is really more than the U.S. government or Israel's government can actually do. Yes, there are disruptors, but everybody knows they're out there. And that kind of disruption and disinformation only works if the target population is unaware it's going on. Now we know about things like COINTELPRO. We know about NSA spying. We know that Israel is paying students to go online and post pro-Israel propaganda. And that completely renders it totally impotent. Because we know that's what's going on. We see somebody standing there with their hair on fire, insisting they can't smell smoke. Obviously, it's a paid corporate or government propagandist.
Right. And, the big thing that you can get an unbiased truth about what's going on today is that conference that they had in Washington, I think 2 weeks ago. I know Ryan Dawson posted a little bit of it. I listened to the whole thing, or most of it, live. It went on all day, unbeknownst to me, but anyway, the parts that I missed. And that was overwhelmingly Jewish people that were talking about Israel.
Well, a lot of Jewish people, especially here in the United States of America, have come to understand that Israel's actions, the actions of Israel's government, actually represent a greater threat to them than any Islamic faction. And they're starting to pull back from that. The Christian Zionist movement in this country has lost almost half of its adherents because Israel's government is behaving so badly, people are coming to understand that's the problem. The behavior of Israel's government. It's not Jew hate. It's not anti-Semitism. The modern-day Israel has got nothing to do with the fairy tale out of the Old Testament, and people are starting to judge Israel's government with the same skepticism that we would judge any other government, including Washington, D.C., London, Brussels, Moscow, Kiev, and the rest of it. And that's the way it should be. No government should be above scrutiny and criticism for religious reasons. That is a dangerous situation. Steve, I got to let you go.
Mike, I have two really important questions for you.
All right, I'll hold you over the news break then. All right. We're going to be back after the news. We got 2 calls waiting. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is still sitting in our control room. We're going to go back to the phones here. We were talking with Steve in Florida. You said you had 2 more quick questions.
Yeah, Mike. Let's see, not even an hour ago, I had lunch with a group of guys, and one of them was like, I'm Jewish. And, a nice guy and everything like that. But, and I'm sort of asking your advice, Mike. I finally said to him, I said, look, are you, this is just between us privately, in front of everybody, but I said, are you religiously Jewish or culturally Jewish? And he said, oh, well, I support Israel 100%. And I said, I think we're going to have some problems. And I said, because I don't agree with a lot of what Israel's doing. He says, well, somebody's got to protect us. Which I think, does the guy not know any better or what?
Well, what really strikes me as odd is he's out there trying to create a crisis, out there saying, I'm Jewish, and there's a very simple mechanism where the Israelis and Israel supporters like to go out and actually be so offensive that people will react to that and say, aha, see, we're under threat. People hate us and we've got to protect ourselves. And it's sort of a self-fulfilling delusion on that. I remember many years ago when I was dealing with some people who were trying to wreck my business here in Hawaii, and one of them was quoted through third party as saying, well, he may not be an anti-Semite now, but he will be by the time I'm done with him. And that's the idea. They deliberately try and provoke a negative reaction because that feeds into their fantasy that they're the world's victims and that everything they do is justified on the basis of needing to protect the Jewish people. But again, Israel's government goes out of its way to attack their neighbors, and then when the neighbors fight back, they say, see, all the world hates us. And a lot of ways, their psychologists will come out and say there are people who have to feed their own victimhood because that's their identity, and that's exactly what's going on here. Listen, our phone lines are loading up. Do you have one more thing real quick, or can I move on?
I do, and thank you. Okay, do you have any idea what's going on with, and I looked, but Bill and Melinda Gates, the government of India suing them for screwing their people with those vaccines.
Yeah, Bill and Melinda Gates are a good example of why we should remember that people who have insane amounts of money are not automatically better than we are. And they tend to think they are. They tend to justify their large fortunes by saying, well, obviously I'm a person of influence and I should go out and do good things. And then they get seized upon by opportunists who will go in there with a good line, global warming vaccines, and use their money to put out these various agendas. But, yeah, Bill Gates very much thinks that there should be forced population reduction. He's a great believer in using vaccines to do that. We mentioned him in the video that we did, What Are They Thinking? And especially with Melinda Gates, who basically married into the fortune, and now she's out there thinking that she has the right to tell other women they may not have children. And I'm sorry, having a lot of money doesn't make you a god. In fact, if anything, it sends you in that other direction.
Do you know anything about the actual suit? I mean, did they buy their way out? No,
it's still ongoing. It's still on. Last I heard, it's still ongoing, and it'll drag through the courts for years. Anyway, Steve, I got a bunch of phone calls.
Thank you, Mike.
I got to let you go here. We're going to go to Al in Canada. Al, thank you very much for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how are you? I hope you're doing well.
Yes.
To reference Mel Gibson, I don't have a dog in this race, but I will say this. To suggest that any part of the population, whether it's through religion or, through a part of the world that they live in, has a defective or missing gene is just silly. We are all a product of our upbringing.
Well, now, wait a minute. Well, no. We do carry a genetic predisposition in us. Okay, that was the failure of the liberal ideology that they could re-engineer the humans by re-engineering the environment. That goes all the way back to that hoax coming of age in Samoa. That was literally the foundation of the liberal philosophy that they could improve humans by changing the environment. We do carry deep within ourselves instincts and biases that we have evolved over the last million or so years. Now, that being said, I agree that this idea that it is a lacking gene that leads to a lack of remorse. No, I would agree with you. That is upbringing. When you have a religion that says fair treatment of others is only for those of your own religion and everybody else is fair game, that's going to cause a lot of friction. And we've seen with a lot of religions, not just Judaism, a lot of religions have attitudes in them that people are taught to believe that say, we're great, the other side are bad, we have the right to force them to believe as we do, and if they don't agree, we have the right to torture and kill them. And, it's one of the reasons why, I think religion is actually in this stage of human evolution, it's a negative aspect because, we're in the nuclear age right now where the next Holy Crusade is going to result in mushroom clouds, and they're trying to exploit that. Pamela Geller and her people are trying to literally build a new Holy Crusade of all the Christians against all the Muslims, killing each other off while Israel stands off to one side and laughs at how silly we all were.
Well, Mike, up here in Canada, they're considering passing a law making it a hate crime to just get involved with this BDS movement.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier in the show, and basically...
This is out of hand.
Harper is saying freedom of speech is for you to go make fun of the Muslims, but if you talk about Israel, it's a hate crime. It's a double standard. It's hypocritical on the face of it, and it should, I hope, underscore to the Canadian people that they, like the United States, are currently living under a puppet government that rules them for a foreign power.
Well, we are living under a puppet government that rules us under, for the hand of another power. It's official now. Bill C-51 is passed. I live in a fascist police state now.
Yeah, so does France. France is doing this. France is doing the same thing since Charlie Hebdo. Freedom of speech means you can make fun of Muslims and Christians, but if you talk about Israel, that's a hate crime. And everybody understands that this is a double standard. If you have freedom of speech, it means the right to criticize anybody, anywhere, any government. Here in the United States, we can criticize President Obama, okay, with impunity. But if we criticize Israel, we come under attack. That tells you who's really calling the shots.
Exactly. Voltaire.
Yes.
Voltaire.
Right.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much here. We're going to switch on down to Julian in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. So I wanted to tell you, this morning I'm watching Fox News, and they're showing on the local affiliate, about the candidates for president on the Republican side, and they have 6 of them or so in there now. And then, but of course, they go from local to then the national guy, and they're talking to him, and what's he bring up? Jeb Bush. When's Jeb Bush going to get in there? Okay. And so I'm just wanting to know if you think that how the Republicans, they think they're Christian, they're the Christian group, the Christian party, and the Democrats are degenerates and everything else. And so if you think that any of these people are going to denounce Jeb Bush for being the brother of a tainted brother that has had a tainted presidency with this legacy of torture. So,
oh no, they're going to use that as a plus. It's a family thing now. We have a new ruling dynasty in this country. I mean, the Kennedys were bad for wanting a ruling dynasty, but the Bushes are good for a ruling dynasty. And of course, the Clintons are doing exactly the same thing. They want to put Hillary in the White House next year, and 8 years from now, they're already grooming Chelsea for a run at the White House. The presidency has become a dynastic rulership passed from one family to the other and back again. That's it. Those are the 2 ruling class families we have now. Okay? Listen, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today. And I'm going to close the phone lines a little early because I have got a lot of stuff to get through and clear off the talking points list. Some of the stuff goes back to middle of last week, but I really want to get through it all here. Now then, apparently out in California, State Senator Mike McGuire of Santa Rosa is out there lashing out against anybody opposed to more illegal immigrants coming into California, and says, really, to understand this situation, you need to get out in the fields and start picking your own strawberries. And people aren't concerned about the strawberries. They're looking at all of these taxpayer-funded programs to bring in these illegals and get them all set up. Now, we are not being racist here. California's economy is already under severe strain, in part because of the huge costs of the illegal immigrants. California's infrastructure is not keeping up with their skyrocketing population, most of that increase being the illegal immigrants. They're facing a water shortage. So by all means, let's open the borders and flood the state with more illegal immigrants. Drinking water, using the waste disposal system, using up the social services. This guy's like another Hillary. He's just expecting that if he can bring in all the illegals and get them voter ID, that he'll be voted back into power. And what's good for the election is bad for the country. By the way, story over at the Daily Mail, they did an aerial flyover of Hollywood, Beverly Hills area. And they found out that all of the homes of the big stars, they're still green. They've got the money to pay the $100 fine and keep on watering their lawns like crazy. Kim Kardashian, J-Lo, Streisand, Petra Stunt. Whatever happened to the idea of xeriscape? Because when I was still living in Southern California and we went through another drought back then, there's always a drought in California. It is a desert. And the water delivery system has not been enlarged to deal with the increasing population. And what is there is in serious disrepair. Cracks in the system are leaking millions of gallons of usable, drinkable water into areas that don't really need it. But governing is choosing, governing is prioritizing, and we need the money for more bombs for Saudi Arabia and Israel to use on people we don't like here. California drought worsens. Critics continue to take aim at the Nestle bottled water plant in Sacramento. Nestle is denying that the water they're taking out is contributing to the drought because, hey, it was always there before. We're not taking any more. The water is still there. It's right on your supermarket shelf. We didn't take it out of the state. You can get all the water you want. Just go in and buy those bottles. And that's what Nestle's doing. They take the water that's in the ground, public property, they suck it out under an expired water permit, put it in a bottle, and sell it back to the people of California at a huge markup. It turns out Walmart's bottled water brand comes from the Sacramento Water District during the drought. And what is making this worse, what's making this drought really serious, 2 of the state's largest aquifers have become contaminated with fracking fluids. Now, as a matter of fact, the fracking companies have come up with a great solution to the drought. They're willing to sell their fracking wastewater to farmers to put on their crops instead of pumping it into the ground. They'll just take these fracking solutions, the wastewater, sell it to the farmers. It is, after all, mostly water, we think, for a small fee, of course. I don't know about you, but I absolutely do not want to eat any produce that's been saturated in that stuff. Had a 4.0 quake down in North Texas, right in the middle of the fracking area. We put up a Google Earth map of where this hit, and you can see the little white squares all over that image. Those are the fracking wells. It is a bit of a problem. Alrighty, let's see. Courts won't stop data-hungry feds. Last week, the Federal Appeals Court in New York said that, yeah, what the NSA is doing is way beyond what even the USA Patriot Act said they're allowed to do. And then they pulled back, 97-page ruling, at the end of which they said it's not up to the court to deal with this. They dumped their responsibility. They refused to issue an injunction against the NSA to stop the spying. And let us all understand a reality of American life. Even if the courts said it's illegal and you must stop, even if Congress voted through a measure saying it's illegal, a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and you must stop, the NSA will go on doing it because they have been in violation of the law and the Bill of Rights all the way back to the 1980s, at the beginning of this massive spy operation called the Echelon Program. By the way, for those of you who like tinkering with hardware, which used to be me many years ago, not so much anymore, there's a Kickstarter campaign that is aiming to manufacture and sell a single-board Linux-based computer, all on one little card, for $9 each. Perfect for embedded applications, robotics, antenna control systems, cruise missiles. Russia is starting to unveil their homegrown PC microprocessor chips to get away from all the hardware backdoors that Edward Snowden has now told us are in there. The NSA's got hardware backdoors in your routers, on your BIOS, on your motherboards, on your smart devices. It's built into the hardware. No way you can take it out. So, let's take a look at the weather. They had a May blizzard in Flagstaff over the weekend, 5.6 inches of snow. Snow and cold weather in Las Vegas, snow on the hills surrounding Las Vegas. The Black Hills got 18 inches of snow yesterday. In fact, snow was falling all the way from Colorado and South Dakota towards the east. And it's not just the United States. The carbon Nazis are going to say, well, that's New England. It's all confined. It's just one spot. No, it isn't. They had a major May snowstorm hit Chelyabinsk in Russia. Thousands left without power. The snowstorm was severe enough to bring down the electrical lines. Upstate New York is currently under a frost warning for tonight. This is May 11th that we're seeing all of this. More about human-caused global warming when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Somebody just sent an email saying, if you misread the clock again, what are you going to do? And I replied, I'm going to buy a new clock. Anyway, getting on back to human-caused global warming. Now, every year we hear about how the Arctic ice is melting away, the poor polar bears are drowning, which is nonsense. Polar bears swim very well. They float. They float while asleep. And the reality is right now, global sea ice area is the second highest on record ever. We have had 20 years of the media screaming about unprecedented melting. And there's just as much, if not more, Arctic ice today as there was when they started this whole global warming nonsense. Remember, this last summer was the summer that Al Gore predicted an ice-free Arctic. Didn't happen. A top Australian government business advisor is saying climate change is a hoax by the United Nations to get us to accept global control of our lives. Part of the platform for the New World Order. And that plan for the New World Order rested on a foundation of 3 pillars. A global pandemic requiring obeisance to a global health authority. Global warming requiring obeisance to a global environmental authority. And a global financial catastrophe requiring obeisance to a global banking cartel. 2 of those have collapsed. The third one, they're still working on that, but trying to build a tripod with only one leg doesn't work too well here. Let's see, story out of CBC. Carbon dioxide global levels surpass daunting milestone. And they're basically parroting something coming out of NASA, which stands for Never a Straight Answer. I should know. I used to work for them. And they're out there screaming about how carbon dioxide levels have hit a new high. Well, let's see. The claim was that when carbon dioxide levels went up, the world would get warmer. The world isn't getting warmer. But it is getting greener. As atmospheric carbon dioxide increases, plant life grows faster, produces more food. The only reason the carbon Nazis picked carbon was they could blame that on human activity to guilt you out of taxes and obedience. Alrighty. Now then, as you know, last week the Progress 59 rocket, the unmanned supply rocket that Russia sends up to the ISS, lost control and fell out of the sky, and it did fall into the ocean, actually not too far from us here in Hawaii. So in about another month or so, I'll be walking along the beach looking for any little packages with Cyrillic writing on there. Add to my debris collection. Ukraine currently lacks the 75 million euros needed to complete the construction of the sarcophagus over the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. I think maybe it's a little too late because that recent forest fire burned the area where the original contamination fell and put it all back up into the air. And even this sarcophagus that they're building over the Chernobyl nuclear plant to replace the one they built that's already falling apart doesn't cover the contaminated areas. It's still there. It's not going away. Neither is Fukushima. Now, there's a company out there called Planetary Resources, and they are getting ready to launch their first little tiny robotic spacecraft to an asteroid as part of a long-term plan to start mining the asteroids for various minerals that are difficult to find here on Earth, which is the stuff of science fiction, and I wish them well. For you people in San Francisco, as we talk about infrastructure problems, Caltrans is running tests saying that the foundation of the new Bay Bridge Eastern Spans Tower is leaking, and salt water from the bay is getting into the ironwork. meaning it's not going to last anywhere near as long as they thought. It may need to have major repair renovation. I have two questions. One, who was in charge of waterproofing that structure? Two, why didn't they use stainless steel rods? Yes, you have to use more of them because stainless steel is not as strong as carbon steel. But it looks like whoever put this together, they just wanted to get it open, get their money, and go home because already, it hasn't been there all that long, and it's got problems. Now, here's a story that's going to bring a smile to the face of all of us here in the independent media. Dinosaur media, meaning the corporate media, is in trouble. Fox, CNN, MSNBC, down 11% viewership this year alone. And this dovetails with that Harvard study that showed only 2% of America's young people aged 18 to 29, which is a prime demographic because they've got the most disposable income, only 2% of those trust the corporate media to tell them the truth. Now, speaking of corporate media, as you know, Chipotle is now jumping on the bandwagon for GMO-free menus and came under immediate attack from the corporate media. They're pandering to the conspiracy theory. How can you do? You should show more strength out there. How dare you give the customers what they want? You will force the customer to buy what we decide they should have. I don't think it's really going to work. Even Wendy's has now come out with a vegetarian black bean burger sandwich. They're not trying to pretend it's meat or anything else. It's a veggie black bean burger, all natural, no GMO. Monsanto's out there saying, you're all sick. You're suffering from a mental illness, orthorexia nervosa. You're mentally ill if you want healthy, chemical-free, GMO-free food. Real Americans love their GMO and chow down with the best of them. Now, a little bit of good news from my former colleagues over in Hollywood, and tip of the hat, Hollywood is now jumping on the GMO labeling bandwagon. People like Malin Ackerman, Francis Fisher, Constance Zimmer, Sharon Osbourne are coming on out there. These are all celebrities who are also mothers, and they're teaming up with these environmental organizations to get out there and say, we have a right to decide what our children are eating. And that's absolutely right. They do. Credit rating company Moody's changes Monsanto's investor rating to negative, which tells us that maybe the GMO crisis has caught up with them. More and more people coming out and wondering if this new super opium that's appearing in Afghanistan that produces twice as much resin with far less water, if that isn't a creation of a GMO lab somewhere. Remember, all this drug smuggling's tied in with the CIA. They've got the resources to go to somebody and say, hey, we need a GMO opium that produces more crop, because we're not making enough money off of the ghetto kids in America with this stuff. We need more. Got to have more of that stuff. Up in Vermont, trade associations are still trying to get a court injunction against Vermont's GMO labeling law. The Grocery Manufacturers Association, the Snack Food Association, the International Dairy Foods Association, National Association of Manufacturers, all are trying to shut down GMO labeling. They don't want you to know what they're doing. And this tells you they know GMO is harmful. If they actually thought GMO was good for you, it would be all over the labels, contains more GMO than the other product. No, we've got more GMO. We have 16 kinds of GMO. They only have 10. So, that's what's going on. Corporations pay American Council on Science and Health big money to push toxic ingredients, science for sale. It's always been for sale. The golden rule of science. Whoever's got the gold decides the science. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today here. And I want to step back here to what's going on over in Macedonia. And you kind of wonder, why Macedonia? What do they have besides statues of Alexander the Great? And apparently, at least part of the discussion is that Macedonia is going to be the hub for several planned pipelines. And whoever's in control of that basically makes the fees off the pipelines here. So we're seeing this story. This is being reported in National Post, how a mysterious, well-trained group of fighters are attacking shopping malls and sporting events. This looks like those Polish-trained snipers up in Kiev trying to kick up problems. And Interior Ministry spokesman Ivo Kotevsky, sorry for botching that, is saying that obviously these are terrorists, whereas the Western media is trying to portray them as Macedonians opposed to their government. Story coming out of Irish Times, European Union alarmed as deadly battle deepens Macedonia crisis. Macedonia is getting Kieved by the United States. Doesn't matter how badly they botched up Ukraine, they're doing the same thing in Macedonia. Earlier in the show, we had links to Macedonian media saying that these protest groups are all being organized and funded by U.S. aid, which every time we see people riled up to turn against their government, or at least the illusion of a people turned against their government, U.S. aid's in the thick of it. Another article, it's got Victoria Nuland is in there urging this regime change. Now let's get on to the wonderful world of vaccines. Down in Mexico, they launched a mandatory vaccine program. It was a 3-in-1 vaccine for tuberculosis, rotavirus, and hepatitis B. 2 babies have died, 39 others in hospital after just 52 vaccinations. Mexico, needless to say, has pulled the plug on this vaccine program. And it's sort of a reminder of back in 1976 here in the United States when the government mandated a swine flu vaccine. And they had to cancel that program when it turned out the vaccine was killing 50 times as many people as the flu was. Right now, of course, the big ticket product in the United States is the measles vaccine. And the U.S. vaccine court has acknowledged the measles vaccine has killed over 100 people it has been given to. But the CDC reports no American, not one, has died of measles in the last 10 years. But by golly, you'll have the vaccine we tell you to buy. Especially out in California, they're still fighting tooth and nail. We, the government, know everything. We're omnipotent, omniscient. It says so right here on the label. And we will decide for you what medications you can have and won't have. We'll decide for you what food you will have and not have. And by the way, somebody else just sent me another article about this idea that the California farmers are going to irrigate their fields with fracking wastewater. That stuff is carcinogenic. In some cases, it's radioactive. That fracking fluid is just horrendous. And these they're just announcing this like it's a done deal. They don't actually say farmers have bought into this yet. Actually, what Chevron is doing in this article that we just put up, Chevron is selling the water to a water district who's simply blending it into the irrigation water. The farmers may not even realize what's happening. And I just can't wait to chow down on that California lettuce laced with carcinogens and radioactive waste. Or the California oranges or whatever. This is totally out of control. We have precious little safe, healthy food left to eat as it is because of the toxification of the Gulf of Mexico from the Deepwater Horizon disaster, the Pacific Ocean from Fukushima. And their solution to the California drought is to let the bottled water companies go on taking all the fresh drinking water they want and will irrigate the food people are eating with toxic chemical waste. It's insane. It's really, really insane. Claire and I want to get off this island and get back to the United States mainland, but no way would we ever return to California under current circumstances. By the way, the ACLU has stepped in the fight against this proposed bill in California for mandatory vaccinations, where you will not be allowed to send your child to school until the child is given all the vaccinations the government has been bribed by Big Pharma to force into their arms. Whether they're effective or not, whether they're harmful or not, it doesn't matter, because money is the name of the game. Money for the big pharmaceutical companies, and part of that money to campaign contributions. And that's all that matters. Because these money junkies are psychotic. They believe they are meant to rule the world, and the world exists only to bring them more wealth. And if some people get sick and die, well, we're overpopulated as it is. Somebody actually suggested this vaccine program in Mexico was the first test of a depopulation program. I doubt that, but if it was effective. 75%? Now, the Guns and Butters show has been running for 11 years on Pacifica Radio, KPFA. And for the first time in 11 years, their show has been blocked from airing by KPFA. The topic of the show, vaccine safety. New concerns being raised about an antibiotic-resistant typhoid that is gaining ground in some parts of the world. Somebody drop another test tube over at the Biological Warfare Lab. Another story coming out of 21st Century Wire, and I made this observation myself. This story that came out last week about the Germanwings co-pilot rehearsing his decline and suicide on the cockpit instruments. And professional pilots are coming out and saying, no, it's nonsense. He wouldn't need to rehearse it, and if he had, the other flight crew would have noticed the change to the flight deck instruments. So that piece of propaganda has fallen apart. If you are using the Avast antivirus on your Windows machine, you need to be careful because the last signature update is falsely identifying necessary DLL files on your machine and paralyzing it. So if you just did the Avast update and your machine quit working, it wasn't your fault. You need to get in touch with Avast and Microsoft about getting that fixed here. Hundreds evacuated as Indonesia's Karangetang volcano erupts in North Sulawesi. And, of course, we're having significant volcanic activity here in Hawaii, along with seismic activity. And it is gaining and growing. We don't know what's going to happen. Now, we have very thin, loose lava, so we don't get the big explosive type eruptions. But there's a lot of lava flowing and a lot of quake activity underneath that southern rift zone. So we're keeping an eye on that. They've been talking about the possibility of an eruption of the top peak on Mauna Loa since February. Now, right now, the active crater vent is Kilauea and down south along Chain of Craters Road, but there's been a lot of activity up at the top of the mountain. And that will be very, very interesting. If Mauna Loa erupts, we can watch it from here on binoculars. So, let's see. Lava Lake at record high levels in Kilauea. Part of the crater wall fell into the lava lake and triggered a rather spectacular explosion, which went viral around the world. And, let's see, we already talked about the earthquakes here. And finally, a suggestion that maybe life on Earth did begin in underwater volcanoes and thermal vents. We were talking about that, I think, about 2 weeks ago, about how if life evolved on the surface of Earth, how it could possibly get down to the thermal vents. Or was it the other way around? Did life begin in the thermal vents? And as the thermal vents cooled, they were forced to seek other environments and adapt to them. And that makes a lot more sense to me. So the cradle of life may be in those thermal vents on the floor of the world's oceans. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I got to do Jim Goddard's show up in Vancouver, and then I got to do some animation work. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. This is a call to Rivero's Rangers. Please get in touch with your local talk radio station. Point them at gcnlive.com. Ask them to carry our broadcasts. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.